Well, hello. Hey, team. Look, I got a new camera. My old camera was terrible, and now I have a new one. And it's good to be with you all. I see Lisa's here and Betsy. Um, I know we got a couple of the people that are joining us, and we've got some folks that have written in with some questions and some thoughts. And Kathy Baggett's with us. Hey, Kathy, good to have you with us as well. Um, and you guys, oh my goodness, you guys are working it out here. Squirrel proofing and landscaping. And oh my gosh, the other day I was on the phone with a parishioner and I was sitting out front because it was so loud in my house. And I'm sitting on my front porch. I'm on the phone and I'm, talking to someone. So I'm trying to be polite as one does when they're talking to a parishioner. And I look, I can see something moving over to my right. I'm sitting on right on my front stoop. And I see something moving over to my right down on the ground. And I look over and I can see the sod. I can see the ground go like this. And it's moving. And I look and there's a whole trail, like just like in the cartoons, and there's a mole under there. I let him be, cause her, I let them be because I didn't think that being on the phone with a parishioner was probably not a good idea to like say, can you hold and then like go kill a mole. And I don't know. I feel bad about killing it anyway. But it was kind of cool to actually see the thing happen. I was like, I didn't see the mole itself. I literally just saw the ground, and you could see the trail where it had dug up, and it was like popping up. It was. If it's either gross or cool or a little bit of both, I suppose. Sort of like church. Hey, so it's good to be with you guys today. I'm really happy to see you and to see those of you that are here. And I know others of you will check in, and I'm grateful for that. And I got some really good questions. I sent out a note on Facebook last night saying like, "Hey, what kinds of things should I answer?" And I got some really cool responses, things that I think are totally worth our time. I mean, anytime you have a question, it's worth our time. That's kind of the point. But the idea that people want to know these things is exciting to me. And so I've got three questions that have been asked already. You guys who are on, you may ask more. You know that you are welcome to, um, and hope that you feel comfortable doing so. But if not, I got these three, and I think they could very easily get us through this hour. Um, our first question is from our new friend Sarah Summers. And Sarah asks, how do you think Jesus would feel about the protests if he lived in modern times? Do you think he would support them or speak against them on Facebook? Which means, of course, Jesus would have a Facebook page, right? And then you had a follow up, Sarah. You said, I know this seems like seems silly, but this is a legitimate question. No, I don't think it sounds silly at all. I mean, us trying to understand how Jesus might be responding to how what's happening in our lives right now is a really important question for anyone who takes Jesus seriously at all. And then you said, do you think he'd say all lives matter? Or do you think he'd say Black lives matter because that group is marginalized? Well, at least we're starting off with a super politicized question. No, I think it's a great question. Um, first, a couple things I want to say, which make me, I'm going to sound really difficult at first. So I hope that you'll stick with me while I sound difficult, because I will address your question directly, but I have to address a couple things about the question first. Okay. Um, so I personally, as Phil, have a strange aversion. Maybe it's strange, a strong aversion to the language that we use. And I'm not insulted at all that you've used it. Sort of the question that you've asked, Sarah, it's a very good question. But in my response, I try to redirect people. When people ask the question, what would Jesus do today? What would Jesus do if he were here today? How would Jesus be responding today? So to be clear, I know that that question is asked, first of all, almost always from a desire to know Jesus' heart better, which I think is fantastic. That's awesome. Like if you're like sitting here wondering, I wonder Jesus' take on this thing, what it would look like, how it would be. I That's a great place to start any wondering about some social issue. Where is Jesus? What would Jesus think? Right. That's better than what would my friends think. That's better than what would specific politicians think. That's better than what my specific ideology or even my culture insists that I think. What Jesus would think were he here is a really good question in the sense of it centering Jesus in the conversation. So, hooray, yes, good. The part that I have a hard time with is that the Christian theology that is traditional Christian theology is pretty clear that Jesus is present right now. And again, I don't mean that to undermine your question, and I'm going to get to your question like more directly in a second. But I want to just point out that when we say, what would Jesus do or think or believe if he were here now? The assumption in that language is he's not here now. Now, I get it. He's not here bodily the way that he was in the first century. I promise I understand that. And I'm not obtuse about that. And maybe I am being overly persnickety in my thinking about this, but it's just super important to me that I want us to move away from, as Christians, the idea that Jesus was here and there was a nice time once upon a time, a long time ago, when things were more clear because Jesus was around. And then Jesus left, and now we're back to being on our own, and we have to figure out what he might do if he were here. My dad died in 2006, so it's been 14 years. And I ask a lot, what would he do if he were here? Because he's not, and I can't call him. I can't ask him. So I understand the desire to say, man, I'd love to call Jesus up on the phone and ask him. I get that. There's something really empowering that happens to us in the Christian faith, which is that in our baptism, we become part of the body of Christ. And from the very first century, in some of the earliest writings, the language about the church, the gathering of people who followed Jesus and cared for one another, was that they understood themselves as the body of Christ, which means that they are the hands and feet and mouth of Jesus in this world. Now we are participating with God. We are participating with Jesus in the work of healing and justice and recovery and reconciliation that needs to be done here, right? So I want to both acknowledge that Jesus isn't here the way he was in the first century, but I also want to acknowledge that Jesus is here now, and not just in a sentimental way, like he's in our hearts or as long as we think about Jesus, but like genuinely Jesus is present in a very real way. So what I would like us to be able to do is ask the question, where do we see Jesus present? One of the things that I do when I talk to people each day is I ask the question, and I do this on Facebook, but I ask the question, where did you see love today? My belief is that question, where did you see love today, helps you have a stronger understanding of how Jesus is present in the world, right? Hey, Chris is here. Hey, Chris Tumulty, thank you so much. I would love to talk with you soon. I'm going to talk to these people about Jesus. If you have any questions, I hope you'll let me know. And I hope Chris at San Diego is treating you well. Much love to your bishop. Much love to you and your family. Yeah, I hope you're good, brother. So I haven't talked about Black Lives Matter yet, and I will. But I want to make sure we understand that Jesus is present in our lives today. Jesus is present, I believe, very strongly in the Black Lives Matter movement. Because when I look for love and I see a movement that is so clearly not just advocating for love, but insisting on love. You see people out in the streets wearing masks and demanding justice, taking care of each other and listening to speakers, but also standing up for those who are marginalized. I think that you hit it on the head, Sarah, when asking the question about Jesus in terms of marginalized people. To Jesus, so here's the thing. Does Jesus love everyone? Of course. Of course. Do all lives matter to Jesus? Of course. Absolutely. Jesus spends particular periods of time and gives a specific amount of energy and teaching and healing, spends his time and energy in public ministry largely on behalf of those who are marginalized. It's not a maybe, it's just what he does. It's not a partisan issue unless you want to make it one. I don't recommend making it a partisan issue. I don't recommend forming a party that stands against the compassion, love, and justice for which Jesus very clearly and actively stood. It's not just that he stood for it, though. Jesus wasn't like, I've heard people talk about Jesus as a community organizer. I don't buy it. I don't think that's true at all. He's a teacher, a preacher, a healer, a rabbi, and the Messiah, the Son of God. So community organization was not his bag. He wasn't mobilizing people to do a specific thing. He was seeking to get people to understand their belovedness and the belovedness of others. Jesus worked hard during his earthly ministry to help people understand that they belonged completely and totally to God, and so did everyone else right in front of them. And so he focused on those people who were not being acknowledged, right? So when Jesus says, blessed are the poor, you've seen maybe that meme on Facebook where he says, blessed are the poor, and someone says, no, blessed are all people, Jesus. Well, yes, actually, Jesus blesses all people in his presence. But he's acknowledging something, that he lives in a culture that doesn't think that poor people are capable of carrying the blessing of God. He lives in a culture that thinks that if you're poor, you deserve it, and that you aren't blessed. And so he's making a corrective statement. It's necessary for people to understand. And even when he says, like, blessed are you when, blessed in Matthew's text, blessed are the poor in spirit, or blessed are you who mourn, the language, who thinks the people who mourn are blessed? No one. So Jesus is the one who steps in and says, you're missing something about how blessing works because you're not seeing it here. The reality is the United States of America, a country I love very much and hope to never leave. I hope to be here my whole life. We have not acted as if all people are equally capable of carrying blessing at all. I was talking to someone last week who was saying that America needs to return to its roots, or return to God. And I said, look, I love this country and I love God. I'm not sure this country that was had baked into it white supremacy and systemic racism in the form of chattel slavery, not to mention clearing out people who already lived here, and to the tune of killing millions of indigenous people so that we could have this land. I'm not sure we have a right to talk about returning to God. I'm not trying to make you, by the way, if you're like hearing this and you're like, oh, here comes the guilt and the shame. Like, I'm not really interested in you feeling guilt or shame, actually. I'm interested in us just acknowledging history and then asking a simple question. Where is Jesus in that? Where is Jesus in white enslavement of Black people? Where do you see that? You find it in the Black people who've been enslaved. That's where you see it. You see Jesus in solidarity with those who are suffering, not propping up people who would harm others and oppress others. The only time Jesus really gets really angry is in the face of, and Christine asks a question about on Facebook about hypocrisy. In the face of hypocrisy by the people who are given the power and the authority to lead Jesus' people, that's where Jesus gets angry. And I talked about this last week. When God gets angry, and I wrote about this in my blog, when God gets angry, and angry is healthy when God has it. God's angry at the injustice that we allow, and that we not just allow, but perpetrate, and that many of us, so to speak, benefit from. So here's the thing. Do all lives matter? Of course they do. Of course they do. But we don't live like it's true. And so we've seen Black people in our country say, we need you to understand that we matter. And there's been some really good illustrations of this lately that I've seen. I mean, there's a comedian, Michael Che, you might have seen him on Saturday Night Live, but he talks about how hard it is when someone says Black lives matter. And you go, well, all lives matter, Michael. And he's like, it's like, his example is, well, I won't, you should watch his example on it. I'm not going to try to do his comic bit, but there's something like, if your house is on fire, you want help putting it out. You don't want someone standing there going, well, all buildings matter. Well, my house matters too. Well, your house isn't on fire. Your house isn't on fire. My house is on fire. Can we do this? Can we be on the same team? Jesus stands in solidarity with people who are seeking justice. He just does. It's not, again, if that makes you uncomfortable, okay, let's talk about that. But it's funny to me that sometimes that's considered a particularly liberal statement. It shouldn't be. Justice seeking should not be confined to one ideology or party by any means. And neither ideology or party at any time has the exclusive rights to that. I don't buy that for a second. So I believe Jesus is present in the Black Lives Matter movement. Black Lives Matter, not only as a movement, as a statement we understand is necessary, as a movement is seeking for us as a country to recognize the existence and the danger, the real actual harm that's being done because of the existence and perpetuation of racism in the systems of our government, not just the people, but the way things are set up. And it's got a real strong interest in us understanding how policing can also fall under that category of systemic racism. And that's tricky. So one of the things that emerged from that as a response to Black Lives Matter was Blue Lives Matter, as if they had to be in opposition to one another, as if to say that you wanted to see reform in the policing of our country so that it wasn't so very clearly damaging more to people of color than it was to white people. When you say you want reform, people say, oh, you're anti-police. And some people are. I mean, some people are. But I'm not, and I don't think that's fair to create that dichotomy. You know, a more humane system is better for everybody. Dr. King, and I always hate being like the white guy quoting Dr. King, so it'll be like, oh, you know, whatever. Just stick with me, I hope. I mean, Martin Luther King is really clear that racism is something that absolutely twists and corrodes white people. It does very clear harm to Black people, we know this, and to all people of color, we know this. But it also does something terribly damaging to white people. White people who buy into racism, whether it be an individual understanding of racism or buy into a systemic racism and perpetuate it, we live in a distorted reality where we are not in proper reconciled relationship with one another. We misunderstand ourselves and we live differently. And likewise, when we place the burdens that we place on police officers to do things they shouldn't do, it does things to them that's not fair for them, for their hearts or their souls. So I don't think that we need to see Black Lives Matter as contrary. Well, it's contrary to our current system overall that is not acknowledging the significance of Black lives, the utter importance, their belonging to our American community. As a Christian, I'm a Christian first. Before I'm an American, before I'm any party or ideology, I'm a Christian. So I don't know what America will do. But I know that Jesus very deeply lives and thrives and empowers, lives and thrives among those on the margins, speaks very clearly, not just for them, but to them and with them. And that Jesus isn't going to be about shouting people down or shutting people down. This is another thing that's really frustrating. And, you know, Sarah, you mentioned people getting on Facebook and saying something, you know, like all lives matter or something like that. Here's the thing. Are you listening? If you're a white person, are you listening to your Black siblings? Are you listening to them? Are you willing to read and listen and hear and digest? And are you reading something not just looking for whether or not you agree with it, but to recognize the heart, the sincerity, and the authentic experience of the person who is reading or speaking or singing to you? My concern is that when we have a large number of people in our country, and specifically when we have a large number of Black people in our country who are shouting that Black Lives Matter because they don't believe that we realize it, and instead of going, I wonder why that is. If I'd never thought, like, gosh, I thought we didn't have a problem, but maybe we do. Like thinking, gosh, I wonder what kind of brings this up for them. Instead of doing that, just insisting, well, that's not okay. I don't like that. All lives matter. It's this thing. It's that like the need to respond, to react, and to shut something down. Man, who cares if you agree? Are you listening? That's my main thing. Are you listening? Because when you listen to the experiences of your Black siblings and not just try to tell them what their life is like, if you listen, your worldview will change. This is an important realization for me in terms of the church. Because, and now, Sarah, I may have completely gone off topic, but this is really important to me in terms of the church. I belong to, our church is mostly white. Not all, but mostly. And I really wanted it, I still really want it to be a racially diverse church, right? And I want to acknowledge before I move on what Andrew Cole just said. He tries to push back whenever and wherever on the absolutism that has embedded our national discourse over the last few years. It's frustrating that because you're this, you can't be that. That mentality, quite frankly, is lazy and prevents solutions to our many challenges and problems. I think empathy is part of the solution to fighting absolutism and thoughts. I completely agree. I mean, we are so busy sticking to our guns and digging our heels in, right? About something, about our entrenched ideas, that we are not willing to recognize something outside of that. So, for instance, like I said earlier, like, why would Black Lives Matter have to be liberal? Why could it not be liberal and conservative, or Republican and Democrat? Why would that have to be either ideologically or partisanly exclusive? It doesn't have to be. What and go down the line for so many of these issues. You know, I was raised, and who knows if I was right. It was just my experience. So I was raised in a specific way. But I was taught that the difference between Republican and Democrat, this is a very idealized version of it, I think, but that it was about what we believed the role of government was. Now, there was still plenty of room for polemicism and partisanship and all sorts of rancor. There's always room for that in the human experience, isn't there? But the idea that this is about role of government. So, for instance, if Republicans and Democrats weren't arguing over whether or not systemic racism exists, they both accepted it was true, and then they could argue with each other, because they're going to argue anyway, about what's the best way for the government and this country to address it. That sounds like a country I want to be a part of. Not, it doesn't exist. Why are we talking about this? Right? But how, like, okay, this thing's real. Now what? And people who are like, well, we don't really think it's real. We don't, like, I believe that you think that. Like, there are people who think the earth's flat, man. Like, there are people who think the earth's flat. They shouldn't belong to a specific party either. We've got work to do to convince people that systemic racism is very real, pernicious, violent, and dangerous, and is doing great harm to all of us, but particularly to Black bodies and to people of color in this country. We need to do that work. We need to do that work in terms of LGBTQ people too. Have to. And again, the idea that this is, we shouldn't be trying to figure out who belongs on the margins in our country. We should be trying to figure out how to get rid of the margins and bringing all people in. And the great American experiment, if it's great at all and if it's American at all, should be an experiment about how we get people out of the margins altogether and bring as many people in, and allow us to be shaped, allow ourselves to be shaped by that reality rather than deciding who gets to be on the margins. That should not be liberal or conservative. I'd like to see Republicans and Democrats argue over the best ways to make sure that we create equality among these groups, among these humans. Sorry, not groups, they're people. And I don't think that we should be arguing about whether or not someone's life matters as much as someone else's, or who deserves what in that way, you know? So, and Lisa's right. We know dozens and dozens who say that Black lives don't matter and they call themselves Christians. It can be really hard to be a Christian. It can be really hard to be a Christian. Where is the love of Jesus right now? Where do you see it? Where do you see love? Follow that with courage, honesty, authenticity. But here's what I was going to say. So I want our church to be multiracial, right? I really do. I would love to take the demographics of Cincinnati, and if that's too broad, take the demographics of, let's say, a 5-mile radius of our church, racial demographics, gender demographics, hetero, homosexuality, bisexual, like sexuality demographics, the whole bit. And if I had my dream socioeconomic demographics, if I had my dream, Redeemer would be a mirror of those demographics. We are not. So I have some friends that I invited to church. I invite as many people as I can to church. You got to know that about me, right? And this is some friends of ours that are Black. And I warned them up front. It's a super white place, but we're very friendly, and we are. I mean, I think that's true. And they one member of that family's come a couple times, but one time the whole family came, and I loved them so much, and it was so cool. It was also, and everyone was really nice to them. I mean, that happened. Everyone was friendly, like no problem. They weren't treated poorly, from what I understand, from what they relayed to me. But also, when I ask people of color into a white space, I'm asking them to become part of this thing. And I get that that seems generous. I really do, because I feel generous when I'm saying it, or at least I feel like loving and caring. And what I'm trying to say is I want us to be part of the same thing, right? But white Christians, and what are we willing to sacrifice so that our space isn't ours anymore, but it's ours, that it belongs to an us, that is an expanded understanding of we. Because in that day, looking at them and seeing them present in that space, and again, treated well and all that stuff, no question. And some people of color feel perfectly comfortable at our church, and that's great. That's awesome. Thank you. Like, I love that. But some don't, and it's because it's a white space by and large. And so I think we historically have thought we're really generous or kind when we invite people into our spaces. And I think it's better than not inviting people into our spaces. I just want us to understand that when we invite people into our spaces, are we willing to be transformed by their presence in that space? I had a we're perfectly happy to have people that are different from us join us, so long as they become like us. That's not a mean, crappy thing I'm saying about my church, by the way. I see that as humanity. That's how humans are. I genuinely believe in the kindness and the generosity of spirit, the beauty and the loving nature of the people of our church, which is why I think that we are poised to do this work of self-examination so that we can begin the work of a racial justice, healing, and reconciliation, that we can repair that breach and start to create new relationships. I just want us to understand that when we do that, we're going to look different, because we have to allow ourselves to be transformed. And the reality is that for far too long in this country, the way that the white power center has allowed people of color to gain power is by conforming to our understanding of what good is and what American is and what right is, rather than allowing that person's different expression and understanding of life to shape us and change us. Right. So I was just thinking about Jesus and that, just coming back to where would Jesus be in this, and where is Jesus in this? Um, Jesus is going to be listening. Jesus is going to show empathy. Jesus is going to insist on justice. Jesus is going to humanize people who are being dehumanized. And that also means that he might, for you who are revolutionaries, he might dine with people you don't like. Jesus dined with Pharisees, and it really upset some people, and did not live the way that even they thought he should. He refused to be categorized in that way. So, you know, Jesus might show up to a Black Lives Matter protest and then make sure to check in with his friend who's a police officer. That might be something Jesus would do. Not, and some people might see that as contradictory. Where is love showing up? Where is the healing that is meant to take place? Yeah. Lisa wrote some stuff. Okay. Would you enjoy doing a preaching swap with a more diverse church and having members go there too? I have mixed feelings about that, only because I think preaching is a really personal thing that happens in the life of a congregation, and guest preaching oftentimes is more performative, more of a performance. And I think of my preaching very much connected to my congregation. But I'm glad to share my pulpit, and if people thought it would help, and if they thought that it could be meaningful and a meaningful expression, I'd go for it, right? I'd want to be careful about what our intentions and our desires were, and what our expectations were that came from that, because I'm aware of the power dynamic of us as a church that is mostly white and with good resources and people who are generally on the upper end of the socioeconomic spectrum. I'd want to be really careful about how we did that, and didn't just. And I want to be really careful. I'd have to be really, white people entering into black spaces can make black spaces feel unsafe. And so, but in all of these questions, and one last thing I want to say about Jesus and the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Man, what's whiter than a white guy deciding what Jesus would think about black people? It's not for me to say where Jesus is. I mean, I can say where I see Jesus, but I would like us to be paying attention to black voices and really listening to where black voices are saying that Jesus is present. There are, while Black Lives Matter is not a religious organization, there are powerful voices within the movement for racial justice, that are black and that are Christian. And they're not the only ones we should listen to. We should listen to as many voices as possible. But I would like Christians, and especially white Christians, to listen to black Christians. They are your siblings in Christ. Listen to them. Pay attention. We should be centering voices like William Barber, who preached at the National Cathedral, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, and will absolutely knock your socks off, and will transform your understanding of Jesus' presence in this current time. William Barber, look him up. Head of the Poor People's Campaign. Read his writings, listen to his preaching and his teaching. It's so worth it. Oh my gosh. So I want to say that where I think Jesus is one thing, but I really want us to be centering, to be centering Black voices in this. And here I am on a screen centering myself and talking to you. But I'm a pastor of a congregation. I have an opportunity to lead people into thinking about these things. People have, for various reasons, placed their trust in me, and we have a relationship of trust and love. And I'm hoping to use that relationship of trust and love to draw us into deeper relationship with people outside of our comfort zones. And I hope that that's a worthy endeavor, and I hope that I'm allowed to do that in a way that's respectful. And I'm going to get it wrong a lot. I'm going to get it wrong a lot. So I will hopefully will be humble enough to have people tell me when to get my act together. Having company managers just grappling together, are we willing to be in their space, do things their way? Yeah, that is the question. And have we been invited? Chris, talk a little bit about committing to something that you might never see the end result of, generational work. I feel many want the end goal to be now. I mean, Chris, this is, holy smokes. Okay. Chris asks a question that is like literally, if you pay attention to the letters in the New Testament, this is what the first Christians are grappling with. They're grappling with a response to Jesus and seeking to live in a way that is honest and real in their response to Jesus. They have come to believe in the resurrection. They have come to believe that Jesus is Lord, and now they want to live their life as if that's true. And many of them think that Jesus is going to show up again in the second coming before they die. And then people start dying, and it freaks them out. And what you see in the New Testament, a lot of the writing is grappling with the multi-generational nature of the work that needs to be done, the work of reconciliation and healing in our world. Jesus has done this thing, right? He's done this thing in his life, in his death, and in his resurrection. Something cosmic has happened. An atonement has been made. A reconciliation has been forged. And now we're living into that. But people keep waiting for him to show back up and usher in the end. And there's in the church, part of the church's work is this slow realization that, oh, this is happening in a different time frame than I thought. And we're gonna have to think differently about how we enact or how we wait for Jesus. Because if we think it's today, wait today, is it tomorrow? And well, the world will end soon, so we don't have to worry about it. This doesn't work when you realize that Jesus still hasn't come back in the way that we thought, and so either he isn't going to and we missed it, or we didn't get it right, or we have a misunderstanding of what it means of that second coming. And the New Testament is rife with examples of apostles, of teachers, of writers teaching and talking to people about how to live as if this is going to be longer than you can imagine. I read the letter to the Hebrews, and it connects our reconciliation and healing all the way back to Moses in the wilderness. Imagine how far back that is, and how this race is still not finished until this world has done its thing. That's crazy. That's generations. That's thousands of years. Thousands. So I do think that we should be prepared for this work to take time, but we also should not be complacent. There's a great quote. You can watch this interview of James Baldwin saying who's an African-American writer from the 50s, or from the second half of the 20th century. Anyway, saying, how long do I have to wait for your progress? Like white people, you want us to be patient while you learn progress. Took my dad's time, took my grandpa's time, it's taken my time, it's taken my nephew's time. He says, how long do I have to wait for your progress? So I think we have to be both patient in terms of understanding the long-term nature of cultural change, and we have to be persistent and ruthless sometimes with ourselves. Can we be ruthless with ourselves and patient with others? That would be tricky, but I think that would be something. And I think that we have to, that we should be aware of that this isn't just about white people should know. It's just not about white people's feelings. It's about the justice that needs to be met, needs to be done. the mercy that needs to be shown right now. So it's both and. It is now and it is going to take time because systems take time to change. It'll take elections, it'll take votes, it'll take generations, and it takes patience. You will need to rest, and you will need to build rest into your resistance and into your justice work. I went to the gym today. Went back to the gym for the first time since March 12th. Talking to my trainer a little bit. I met with her last week to just check in and sort of get things started, but today was the first day I trained. And when you're actually going to the gym and working out, you've rest days, right? And you know why you have rest days, right? Because your body, it's not like you're being lazy. Your body literally needs a certain amount of rest to repair. So we need to build that into the work that we do. We need to rest individually from it. And we need to rest at different times so things that can have a perpetual motion, right? But we need to understand that this is the work of a lifetime. The work of a lifetime. And we need to act accordingly. I really think that. I have never read any John Perkins, but I am glad to check it out. And I'm grateful for the reference. Leslie Martin, I didn't know you were here. I'm super excited. Hi, Leslie Martin. I hope you're well. You have some of the best memes, the dankest, as it were. You're using your platform. She's saying, this is what she's saying to me, for those who can't see it. You're using your platform as a white man in a position where people listen to you to redirect the attention to Black voices who can actually speak to the experiences. That's the best you can do. Thank you. That's my hope. And that's my hope. That's my hope. And I will check out John Perkins. And thank you for saying so, Leslie. And thank you so much for being here. What an awesome thing. Thank you. What a joy you are. We have a couple more questions, by the way, that I haven't gotten to yet. And they're good questions. And I talked a little bit about one, and I've talked a little bit about it before, just a little bit, but our friend Christine asked the question, can Jesus explain hypocrisy? Is hypocrisy a necessary human trait? Why do so many not see it? Why is there a need for it? I don't think there's a need for hypocrisy, but Jesus definitely sees it, and he definitely calls it out. He definitely calls it out. And there's this understanding, and I wrote about this, I think last week, but this text in Isaiah, when you might be familiar with the prophet Isaiah quoting God saying, your ways are not my ways and your thoughts are not my thoughts, says the Lord. And we're like, for as far away as the east is from the west, or the heavens are from the earth, are your ways from my ways. And you're like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm not God. But then the next part is he says, because my word, Jesus or God says, because my word is effectual. Because when I say something, when my word leaves my mouth, it goes down into the earth and then it brings up new plants and is fruitful, and it does not return to me empty. So the way that God understands the difference between God and humanity is when God says something, God does it. And when humanity says something, it doesn't necessarily mean anything at all. So God's been annoyed with our hypocrisy for 3,000 years, at least. Is it a necessary human trait? No. Is it a common one? Yes. Yes. So we have a desire to be seen a certain way. We want to be liked. We want to be approved of. We want to be valued. We want to be on the right side of things. We also, all of us, every single one of us, have a propensity to screw things up. All of us, every person. That's embarrassing to us, and it is a source of shame. And so oftentimes things of which we are shamed, we will hide, and sometimes people will speak the most loudly against the things that they do that they're ashamed of. This is not of Christ. And Jesus is not a fan. Our desire is to allow our words to be consistent with our actions. It's a very natural human way to be for that not to be the case. But the desire should be that our words and our actions line up. That if our country is going to say that we stand for life for liberty, for the pursuit of happiness. Um, if we stand for liberty, we shouldn't be the most heavily incarcerated country in the world. That's not freedom. And we shouldn't be incarcerating Black people at an astronomically higher rate than white people. That's not freedom. And who's allowed to pursue happiness? And who decides that? And life. It's hard to say we value life. We value some lives. What would it look like for our deeds, our actions, to be in support of our words and to help us live more fully into that? What would that look like? Lisa Clemens asks a fantastic question. She says, I've been talking to more young teens lately, and they are so smart. How do we explain or raise them to understand that the same book we understand teaches us to love others is used to justify hate? She's referring to the Bible, y'all. How do we teach them to not fall away from faith when they can't envision what a future where their generation leads a church looks like? This is a phenomenal question. Thank you for it. And it's based in your desire to listen and to understand, but also to share something of yourself with others, which is beautiful. So the first thing I want to say is, if you identify yourself as a Christian and treat young people with respect and listen to them and show that you care about them, and that you care about their opinion, then you're going a long way. As I've said before, what if Christians were known as the people who listen to others? What if we were known as those who listened without judgment and sought to seek and serve Christ in all people, loving our neighbor as ourselves? What if we were people who were famous for respecting the dignity of every person we met? How can you and I treat people like that? And when they ask why, you can say, oh man, my priest told me to. My church told me to. Because this is a second part that's really important to me, and it might sound really self-promoting, but my God, like, we got to invite people that don't know to church, that don't know that a church could be like that. Because a church can be a place where you can be loved and cared for, where you can be yourself, where you can understand yourself as belonging and blessed for who you are, and not for who others say you are or who others say you should be, but literally for who you are. You can be blessed and belonging, and your beauty can be recognized. You have the benefit of being part of a community like that. And we believe in the church that everyone belongs in a community like that. So one thing it's worth saying to people is not all churches are like that, but my church is a church where hopefully that's not the case, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. I know that there are churches that say the Bible is a justification for oppression, or a justification for me to blot you out or hate you. I get that you've experienced it that way. And I've experienced it that way sometimes. But I've also experienced our scriptures in the community of faith to which I belong. I've seen them used to build me up and help me understand my belongingness to God, and help me to love people differently and to listen differently. Really, what kind of church do you go to? I go to this Episcopal church. This is, like, I'm not trying to do the whole like bring a friend to church every day sort of thing, like to count the numbers, to get the numbers up. That's not the point. But if you know people who are experiencing Christianity as harmful, one thing we can do is not diminish their experience, but acknowledge it. You're right. That's a problem. Yeah, the Bible can be used that way. I hate that. That does not seem to be the way that it was intended, but I get that it happens. No, I make no excuse for that. It's not okay. I got to say, I've been hurt by churches before. I'm trying to be a part of a church where we where we recognize those pains and where we try to be healed from them and care for each other, right? I think that's something that's worth being said. I think that's something that's worth it. And not trying to fix or change them. If someone says, no, you lost me on church is not going to happen. Okay. And then love them for who they are. Because again, what if Christianity was known as the religion of people who love people for who they are? It'd be awesome. That would be awesome. But I do believe in the power of community. Our church at this time, during this time of physical distancing, has kept people connected in a really meaningful way. A lot of people are connected now in ways they never have been before or since, and it's changing lives. And it's reminding us that, and for those of us who feel isolated, what are we missing? Community. But I would say on one hand, yeah, all communities kind of cool. There's different kinds of community that are great, but I got to say, not all communities are the same. Our community is founded on love. And your unconditional belovedness is the centerpiece in the defining reality of our community. And I don't think that's the same as any other place. That people across racial, gender, and economic and political barriers in across the spectrum can find themselves in a place where they are cared for and loved for who they are, and recognize that they are beautiful for who they are. That's not we don't see that enough. We don't see that enough. I got someone coming up the walkway. You're going to hear the doorbell ring. I am going to need to get off here in a little bit, but I'm not going to jump off that quickly. We got someone coming to inspect our house. Appraise. They're appraising our house. That's what it is. It's an appraisal. No, that's not at all it. This is a person who's coming to do an estimate because we're going to move. Can you hear my doorbell? The question is am I going to get it or is Krista going to get it? I may get up and run out in just a second. We'll have to see. Beth Weinwood's here. Hello, Beth. I'm so glad you're here. To all the people that are here, thanks for joining us. I am going to wrap up, actually. Oh no, I got 8 more minutes. I don't want to wrap up. Wesley. All right, I'll be right back. Included is a really good word, Lisa. To feel included is really, really important. And I agree completely. I think that's the thing is that so many people don't know that they belong. And going back to this conversation about race, which we can't get over, not only do we have people who historically have not belonged the way that others have in this country, but what we see in a lot of the fear and the backlash, the white fear and white backlash, is a fear of loss. And I know that we'll say, well, they're afraid of losing their supremacy, or I get that that's the case for some people, but I think for some people, and this doesn't excuse any behavior that's inappropriate or unloving. I think there's some people who they're scared of if they admit that this is true, what does it mean about them? If systemic racism is real and they've been part of that, what does that mean about them? Because they're so scared that they won't be included if they're not the right kind of person. And if it turns out that they actually have been perpetuating a racist system, then what does that mean about them? And then they will not belong. That's a genuine fear that people have that they won't necessarily articulate. But it's a genuine reality of where am I in this future? I was reading an article by a guy who'd grown up in rural, I forget where, but in the Midwest, in an agricultural community, who had come out of that and loved his people and was not at all dismissive. And he said, one of the reasons that these blocks tend to vote Republican and conservative values is not necessarily because they inherently have a problem with people who are different from them. It's one, they don't see these folks, but also two, that they can be treated like they're idiots for not having that experience that people in urban lives have, and by literally in urban settings like city settings, and that they don't know that anyone's looking out for them, and they're scared that they won't be looked out for. They're scared of being left behind. Now, again, I'm not using. Don't hear what I'm not saying. This is not an excuse for poor behavior, and it's not an excuse to reject a movement. It's not an excuse to drag our feet on the issue of justice. It is a recognition that everyone is scared right now. And that's not the same as saying all lives matter. It's not a reason for us to ignore the work that needs to be done. Can we do this work in a way that's humanizing and loving? Can we do this work in a way that acknowledges that everyone wants to be included, belonging, cared for, right? So I think that's a really big thing. And then hopefully our church actually is doing things that make a difference. You know, not just our church, the church. You want to see the church mobilized to help make things more just and loving. I think that's the thing I keep coming back to. I'm going to wrap it up. I know I said it's called office hours, plural, and I haven't even gone a full hour, but I'm tired of this. I love you guys, but I talked a lot, and this is big stuff, and I've probably screwed up a lot. So if there's anything I shouldn't have said, let me know. I really hope that you'll invite some folks and come back next week. We do this every week at 11 a.m., and it is a real joy. If you've had trouble logging onto the live chat, you theoretically you have if you have a YouTube account, you can log on to your YouTube account and then you can join the live chat. I have a couple people who were not able to do that today, and I know that happens sometimes. I'm speaking as someone who's never tried it myself. Okay. But I've heard that that's what you do. And you can always feel free to message me on Facebook and ask me a question, or email me if you're not on Facebook and ask me a question that way. And I'll answer it next week. Bob Dylan put out a new album last Friday. So I've listened to that roughly 12 times, not all the way through 12 times, probably 3 times or 4 times all the way through. So that's been delightful. Delightful is a funny word for a new Bob Dylan album. It's been pretty rad, fantastic. And then, so Neil Young put out an album that was not new. It actually was written and recorded and put together back in like 74 or 75, in between 2 of his best albums. And then he just didn't put it out. In between On the Beach and Tonight's the Night, he put this out. He made this album and never put it out. It's called Homegrown, and it is really good. And then there's this band called the Secret Sisters. Is that their name? That I've been digging into lately. I listened to them this morning while I was working out. The Secret Sisters. They have a new album, came out in February, called Saturn Return, which I'd listened to once in February and then forgot about. Now I'm listening to it again. I think Brandy Carlisle produced it. So Secret Sisters are pretty cool. And I continue with my obsession on this Ella Fitzgerald complete piano duets album. So that's what we're all listening to around here at Casa Duvall. Showed my kid my 9-year-old the Indiana Jones movies. We hit all 4 of them. So if you have movie recs for kids, let me know. This is my life. Dylan and music, and showing my kids movies that they're probably not old enough for yet, while doing church from home. We're moving towards getting things together for in-person gathering. If you are a member of our church and you have not taken the survey about regathering, please go on our website and take the survey about regathering. We need as many people to take it as possible. Your opinion matters. You are included and you count. So Lisa and Betsy, if you haven't taken it yet, Beth, if you haven't taken it yet, go right ahead. Leslie, since you're in Vancouver, you probably don't need to take it, but you're welcome to. If you click the video on the Redeemer page, you don't get the chat. You have to go to the YouTube link above it. Oh, that's helpful. Does that mean people don't see the chat? I'm curious. Do they not see the chat if they click from the video on the Redeemer page? We're going to keep working on this. We're going to keep trying to get it right, because I love doing this with you guys. I love it. All right. I've told you my music recommendations. I've told you my movie recommendations. No, I didn't. I just said Indiana Jones is great. Um, I really love the opportunity to get in front of the camera and talk with you guys. I love you asking questions over on the side. I love you interacting with each other. I love that we get to check in. I love that we have these questions that we get to ask. You are wonderful. Much love to you all. I hope you take care of each other and pray for each other this week. Shoot out a prayer for me if you will, and we will all be together again next Tuesday, same time. All right. Bye now.